everybody. Hope all is well. We are back with another tier list. This time we're going to be doing one of my all-time favorite songwriters, Björk. I'm going to be going through each album from debut up to Utopia, and I'm going to score each on this tier list with S being the highest and D being the lowest, and I'll explain why I gave the scores that I did. I think it's undeniable that Björk is one of the most talented and unique artists of our time, and each of her albums are distinctly unique from one another, and they each offer the listener a completely different experience. So I'm sure there will be a lot of disagreements with some of my scoring, and I'm sure there will be a lot of agreement as well. But let me know what you think in the comments. If I get any information wrong, please correct it and I'll fix it. And yeah, that's about it. Let's just jump right into it. Okay, so we're starting out with Debut from 1993. I'm going to give this one a C. Initially, I gave it a B, but after listening to it more and really thinking about it and comparing it to some of the other albums, I think I do have to put it in C tier. This one has always been tricky to me because I do like it and I think it has a lot of really amazing moments, but just as an overall album, I don't think it's her best work. Production-wise, too, I think most Björk fans do agree that this album probably has the worst production of any of her albums. There's definitely some incredible songs on here, but then there's also a handful of songs that I'm not crazy about, and I've always felt like the overall mood of this album seems to be kind of all over the place. The beginning is incredibly strong with Human Behavior, definitely a great opening song, and it's a great way to establish Björk's sound. It's the perfect blend of that electronic pop sound, but it also sounds like it's getting mixed with some live instruments, creating this really interesting hybrid. And I love the vocal melody on it. It's very catchy, but also kind of dark at the same time. So it's creating this awesome sound that's experimental, but it also crosses over enough into sort of that pop territory where it can be a hit song as well. So I love that as an opening track. But then the second track, Crying, is an example of one of those songs that I'm not that crazy about. I like the chorus. I think the chorus has a good melody and it has really pretty background harmonies. But other than that, I'm not crazy about it. I think the production is, not the greatest. I think the piano sound is a little bit weird. And just the other parts have always just kind of bored me. This has kind of been a skip over track for me. But then we get to Venus as a Boy, which I think is an absolute masterpiece. One of Björk's best songs. Amazing vocal melody, beautiful chords in the keyboard part, amazing arpeggios going on behind the vocals in the chorus, and nice use of the tabla drums too, which I really appreciate. We all know how experimental Björk has always been with her instrumentation, and this was sort of an example of that happening on the first album, where she wanted to incorporate some Indian instruments, and I really appreciate that as well. And I think this is another example of a song being experimental but poppy and catchy enough at the same time, where it sort of has that crossover appeal the same way that like Human Behavior does. And I think this is, one of the best Björk songs of all time. After that, we change up the vibe a bit with a live song entitled There's More to Life Than This. This is more of like a hard, upbeat electronic song, and it's just another one of those tracks that really doesn't do much for me, and the fact that it's live has always been a little confusing to me. And then the album continues with a beautiful jazz standard called Like Someone in Love. I really love Björk's version of this song. Her beautiful vocals going against that amazing sweeping harp sound just complement each other really nicely, and I do like the placement of this song, but at this point in the album, the main issue that I have is that I feel like it's very hard to define what the mood is supposed to be. We're 5 songs in so far, and to me, Human Behavior and Venus as a Boy sort of work together, and then Crying and There's More to Life Than This work together in a separate sense, and then Like Someone in Love is kind of like a standalone track because it's so different from those other 2 categories. So that's what I mean when I say there are a lot of great moments on here, but as an overall album, I don't think it's one of her best. I do appreciate Like Someone in Love though, and I like that we can get a small glimpse into Björk's jazz upbringings as well. Then we continue with a more upbeat electronic song entitled Big Time Sensuality. Not a bad song, but not one of my favorites on here. I typically tend to gravitate more towards the darker, sadder songs that Björk does, so that's probably one of the big reasons why a lot of the songs on this album just aren't for me. After that, though, we actually do have a string of 3 songs that I really like a lot, with One Day, Airplane, and Come to Me. I like the keyboards on One Day. There are some parts that almost remind me of Boards of Canada, so production-wise, I like what's going on here. I love the dark, mysterious vibe of Airplane, and I like how she utilizes the saxophone sections throughout it. Really creative writing. And on Come to Me, I really love the string arrangements, the chord progression, and the tone of the lead keyboard line is really nice. Good production on that one as well. So in terms of consistency and momentum, this string of 3 songs is always kind of the part of the album that I like the most when I'm listening to it. Obviously, if there was a different song sandwiched in between Human Behavior and Venus as a Boy, that would be, like, obviously the most consistent part of the album. But in terms of just the most momentum that keeps building, I would say these 3 songs are kind of my favorite part. After that, we have Violently Happy, which I think is a pretty good song. I know a lot of Björk fans are crazy about this song. I've never been crazy about it, but I think it is pretty good. I like the keyboard sounds, especially. It has really cool keyboard sounds that kind of remind me of like an early 90s video game and sort of bring me back to my childhood. Then the album concludes on a softer, more mellow note with the Anchor song, which consists of just vocals and a saxophone section. Very pretty song and a nice way to wrap up the album. So, yeah, like I said, it's not a terrible album. It has a handful of really good tracks, and there are some really great moments. And I do think this album can be a good introduction into Björk's sound, but at the same time, I think that there are much better albums to come. So, yeah, this one's going to get a C. Okay, next we have Post, and I'm going to give this one an A. I think this is an incredible album. A significant improvement upon debut. I consider this one to be more of sort of an upgraded, more experimental, and more polished version of debut. Right off the bat, it opens up with the hard-hitting, super badass track Army of Me, which I absolutely love. Really awesome bass line with this really dark vocal melody on top of it. And it's establishing a completely different tone for the album, especially when you compare it to the opening track from the previous album with Human Behavior. We're getting a whole different kind of vibe with this track. And then after that, it goes into one of my all-time favorite Björk songs entitled Hyper Ballad. This is a heartbreaking relationship song about needing to deal with your own issues in order to let yourself be happy with someone else, and she's depicting these different scenarios that she's going through in her head while her significant other is still sleeping. Really amazing lyrics, and just an absolutely perfect piece of music. Then we have another amazing track entitled The Modern Things, and I think this one picks up the vibe nicely, leaving off from Hyper Ballad. This is like a mid-tempo sort of song. It has a really beautiful vocal melody, very catchy. I love the chord progression that's happening underneath the verse, and I really like when it transitions into that swing jazz section. It's very unique, and once again, a nice way to see some of Björk's jazz influences coming into fruition and getting blended into this new sound that she's creating. After that, we have the jazz standard entitled It's Oh So Quiet, which is one of Björk's biggest hits, and I like this song a lot, but in the context of the album, I had always wished that they left this track out. I thought it would have been better off as just a single because I really love it on its own, but hearing it a few tracks away from Army of Me is just a little bit too extreme of a mood change for me. But I do really like it on its own, and I think her vocal work on this is absolutely astonishing. Then we have Enjoy, which is another really super solid track. I really love the bass line in this one. It has this really dark, eerie sound to it, and Björk has this really aggressive, distorted vocal melody over it, and it just hits so hard. Another one of those bangers like Army of Me. I really love the heavier direction that she's taking with some of these tracks on this album. Then we bring things down a bit and things take more of a somber, sad sort of turn with the 2.5-minute song You've Been Flirting Again. I think the placement of this song is very appropriate. It gives you a little bit of a breather after a bunch of those bangers that we had at the beginning. And I love the string arrangements behind the vocal melodies. And I love the ending, how it fades perfectly into the next track, Isabel. Isabel is a great track, a really cool vibe, and it has some really unique chords going on as well. She's using a minor major 7 chord in the first section, which is not a very common chord used outside of jazz. And I love the contrast between the first and second section when that violin part comes in the second section. It just hits so hard, and it's such a nice, satisfying sound when that section comes in. Then we have another incredible song entitled Possibly Maybe. And at this point, just based on everything that we've heard, I think that this album is far superior to debut. Really, my only critique so far is just having It's Oh So Quiet be on the album. But beyond that, I like every song so far. There hasn't been one dull moment. Possibly Maybe is a very dreamy sort of song. It goes through a lot of different feels. It has these lush keyboard arpeggios in the Lydian mode against the beautiful vocal harmonies. And it's a very nice way to bring things down a bit after Isabel. Then after that, we have my 2 least favorite tracks from the album, which is probably the reason why this is an A tier and not S. But we have I Miss You and Cover Me, and they're not bad songs, but in comparison to everything else that we've heard so far, this is definitely the part of the album that loses a little bit of momentum for me. And then the album concludes with Headphones. This is a really pretty song, very spacey, and it really takes its time to develop. It has amazing lyrics and almost has sort of an eerie quality to it. When you look at the opening track, Army of Me, and then the final track, Headphones, I think she did a great job of starting the album off heavier, and then about from the halfway point, she starts bringing it down more and more to eventually conclude with Headphones. So this is a very solid album, and an album that I would probably recommend somebody listen to first if they want to get a sound for Björk. So yeah, this one gets an A. Alright, so now we have arrived at Homogenic, and this one is easily going to get an S. Absolute masterpiece, and I think it's a revolutionary album for Björk. Homogenic marks a significant shift in Björk's sound and her image. At this point, she's the most famous Icelander in the world, and she wants to shape people's perceptions about what being Icelandic means through her music, and use this as an opportunity to redefine her sound and establish her own version of Icelandic music. To her, things that were distinctly Icelandic were the pagan and literary heritage, the honesty of the people, and the natural environment and how you can fuse it with technology. She's always talked about how people in Iceland are very in tune with nature but are also very technologically literate at the same time. She was also much more well versed in the studio process at this point too, after going through her first two albums, and this is also the first album where she's collaborating with producer Mark Bell, which I think was a great addition and led to a lot of great songs and a lot of great albums. It opens up with Hunter, which establishes a very dark, sort of aggressive kind of tone. I love the way that she mixes the string section with the electronic instruments, creating this really interesting hybrid, similar to what she had said about Iceland being a resemblance of combining nature and modern technology. And then we continue with Joga, another absolute masterpiece. This one has beautiful string arrangements. Once again, amazing combination of strings and electronic instruments. Lyrically, it's talking about her best friend Joga and how her friendship got her through so many tough times. Björk had been going through a dark time leading up to this album, going through a breakup, and for about 9 months there was a man named Richard Lopez who was stalking her online and made all these really creepy videos. And it had all culminated in him attempting to mail a bomb to her house and then committing suicide shortly after. So at this time in her life especially, I'm sure friendship was a very important thing for her, hence why she wrote this song about Joga. But very beautiful song, very catchy vocal melody, and just all around I think it's one of Björk's best songs of all time. The album continues with Unravel, a beautiful song about love unraveling as you or your loved ones spend more and more time apart. Beautiful instrumentation with electronic instruments as well as the saxophone and the church organ. Then they pick things up a bit with a heavier song entitled Bachelorette. Super awesome song, and I think the track placement here is perfect. After the first 3 tracks, putting a song like this in there where it's heavier and it picks the energy up a little bit is a really good move, and I really like the contrast. Then we have All Neon Like. This is more of a techno kind of groove, but it's still relatively chill at the same time. Really cool song with a great vibe and really good sounds in the keyboards. And I think it's a nice change of pace from how the album has been so far. I feel like the first 4 tracks are a little bit more dark, and this one kind of changes that up a bit, which I like. After that, we have 5 Years, and this seems to be a song that's telling a former lover that they need to move on and that it's their loss that the relationship is over. This one has a unique groove to it. I think it actually is using some 808 bass, which is really cool. I feel like that isn't something that was used as often back then as it is now, so I always thought that was interesting. And while I do like this song, I will say that it's probably my least favorite song at this point, but still good. But in comparison to everything else we've heard so far, if I had to pick a least favorite, it would be this one. After that, we have an awesome song called Immature, which seems like a continuation on 5 Years. The lyrics are basically looking at a failed relationship, and Björk is, looking at it and saying, how could I be so immature to think that you could go out and try to replace me? And I've heard in interviews that Björk has said that this song was really about her developing a more realistic idea of what love is. And that seems to be the main theme that this album is centered around, love in a lot of different forms. I love the vibe of this song. It has a really cool euphoric sort of sound to me, particularly in the keyboards. I love the single note keyboard lines that are happening underneath the vocals, and just a solid song. And then the album continues on a more upbeat note with Alarm Call. This song grooves pretty hard, and it's probably the most danceable song on the album at this point, and I think it's clear that the middle section of the album does have more of an upbeat and less dark vibe than the first half does, but I think the contrast works really well, and I think the transition is very smooth. It doesn't feel forced or out of place at all to me. The vibe does change up again, though, for the last 2 tracks of the album, starting with Pluto, which is a really dirty, heavy sort of techno-punk kind of song. I love the beat. It almost sounds like something that could have been inspired by Aphex Twin. And I love the distorted vocal melody. Really interesting chords in the second section as well. She's utilizing those minor major 7 chords again, which are really eerie and dark sounding, and we're going to encounter more and more of those on future albums, which is really cool. And then the album concludes with an absolutely beautiful track entitled All Is Full of Love, one of my favorites on here. And Björk has described this song as being about a place where love and lust meet. And I love the way that this wraps up the album because there's a lot of different love themes being told throughout, some good and some bad. And the way that this final track just connects it all into a universal kind of love is really amazing. And it shows you that this album was very clear and very well thought out from the beginning. And I think this is almost mutually accepted as one of Björk's best works of all time. Tons of great songs, amazing production, and the start of a new, more experimental Björk. So this one, hands down, gets an S. Okay, next we have Vespertine, and I'm going to give this one an S easily. This is my favorite Björk album, and one of my favorite albums of the 2000s. Just an absolutely incredible piece of work. When I listen to this, I'm just blown away at how many amazing songs there are on just this one album. And the way that Björk had compared this to Homogenic is that she said that Homogenic was meant to be more of an outdoor nature, external type of album, whereas Vespertine is more of an indoor, internal type of album. She's continuing with her experimentation, and I feel like the production reaches a whole nother level on this one, keeping a lot of the instrumentation from Homogenic, but also continuing to experiment with samples utilizing all kinds of interesting noises, and also creating instrument samples as well so that the quality would stay the same if the songs were downloaded, because this was done in the early days of Napster, and those samples create a very unique sound that adds a whole nother dimension to the sound of this album. Similar to Homogenic, there's a love theme going on throughout the album, but this time it's coming from the recently formed relationship with Matthew Barney. The album opens up with Hidden Place, and right from the beginning, I'm loving it. The opening sample creates this really ambient vibe, and her vocals enter, and it eventually culminates into the full group coming in over the chorus. And when that first chorus comes in, it just feels so satisfying and so euphoric. Just an incredible start to the album. And then we continue in a similar vibe with Cocoon. Beautiful production on this one. Björk's vocal melody is higher pitched and breathier, and the vocal part against those dark ambient keyboard sounds and those high pitches in the percussion samples create this really beautiful synthesis of parts. And after that, we continue with my favorite song on the album entitled It's Not Up to You. I love the contrast between the sections. It opens up with this sort of dark, mysterious verse that slowly introduces strings, bass, and percussion, and eventually culminates into this beautiful, euphoric chorus with the sweeping harps and this beautiful vocal melody. And going into that chorus is one of my favorite moments in all of Björk's music. I think it's just so beautiful, and it just gets even better as the song develops and you get that ending section where the choir joins in. Just so many amazing moments on this song, and easily one of my favorite Björk songs. Then we have Undo, a song that I would say has a similar vibe to Cocoon. Amazing production, really dark ambient keyboard sounds on this one as well. Some of the parts on this one almost remind me of Boards of Canada, which I love, and I love the double tracking on her vocals, meaning that she's recording the same vocal part twice on top of each other. Very nice effect, and once again, great use of the harp. The song has a very pretty choir towards the end that creates another really euphoric sound. And that seems to be a word that I keep coming back to with this album, but that's probably the best word that I could think of to kind of sum up this album is euphoric. After that, we have Pagan Poetry, and at this point, I'm just blown away at how good this album is. I mean, we're only on track 5, and every single track so far has just been a banger. I believe this is the first track on the album to use the music box, which is an instrument that we're going to hear a couple more times on a few of the other songs, but I really love the effect that this adds. I love the production behind it, how they take it and they just make it sound so eerie and so dark. And it's a very specific sound that's sort of a trademark to this album. You know, when I think about this album, part of what comes to me is that sound of that really eerie music box. After that, we have an instrumental track which is a little over 90 seconds long entitled Frosty, which is named after her son. This is a very beautiful sort of wintry kind of sound with a really unique production going on. It's using that music box again, but I've also read that it's a music box combined with a glockenspiel, so not exactly sure. If you know for sure, let me know in the comments. But such an incredible sound and mood, and it feels perfectly placed after the first 5 tracks we had. It gives us a little bit of a chance to unwind for a second. And then the song connects perfectly into the next track entitled Aurora. This song is just so sublime, so beautiful. And once again, we're incorporating those really unique instruments with the music box, alternating with the harp, which creates such a magical touch. The combination of those two instruments I really love. After that, we have an Echo Estain, which I would say is one of the most haunting songs I've ever heard. The first time I heard this, it actually kind of freaked me out, but I love it. It's really slow and tense, and it has this unresolved mood, which is like a bit of a change from everything else we've heard, but I love the turn it takes here. It takes a really dark turn, and I have no idea what's going on in terms of the chords and the theory behind her vocal melody, but they're doing some serious experimentation and some really cool stuff in this. And if I ever figure out what's going on, maybe I'll make a video on it. But amazing track. And then we bring things up a bit with Sun in My Mouth. This one has really great production. It's a little bit more minimalist. There's no percussion going on. And to me, this is sort of the breather before the last stint of the album. And I think it's a great song in that context. Then we have Heirloom. I really like the vibe shift that this one gives. Nice collaboration between Björk and Console, and I really love the beat and the production. Once again, almost gives me a Boards of Canada sort of vibe, which is a cool contrast from some of the other more electronic songs earlier in the album. And then things go back down again with our second to last song, Harm of Will. Another beautiful ballad that has all the same great things that all the other great ballads on this album have had so far, and I think it sets up the ending track very nicely. And then the album concludes with Unison, which is a very beautiful, epic ending, concluding all of the different love themes throughout the album, with a song that's talking about unity and embracing each other, similar to All Is Full of Love on Homogenic. I would say that the way that this song builds is similar to It's Not Up to You, where it starts off pretty stripped down and it gradually keeps adding parts until it eventually culminates in this really beautiful, euphoric chorus. And I think it's just a perfect conclusion to a perfect album. There isn't one song I dislike or one song that I think is out of place. I think this is as good of an album as you can get. So this one hands down gets an S. All right, then we get to Medulla, and this one is going to get an A. This is an amazing album. One of the bravest and most ambitious pieces of work in Björk's whole discography, in my opinion. It truly shows you the depth of what the human voice is capable of and what it can accomplish. This is also an album that I would definitely say gets better the more you listen to it. The first time I heard it, I wasn't initially crazy about it, but now I'm like completely blown away by it. The album is predominantly vocals, with about 90% of all the noises and sounds you hear being made with the human voice. And it uses, some minimal instruments and a little bit of electronics, but majority of it is just vocal stuff. And Björk had said that she wanted to do a vocal album with a strong feeling of heart, blood, and meat. And that makes sense considering that the title is Medulla, which is Latin for the word marrow. And in her words, she said that she wanted to prove that a vocal album didn't need to be a vegetarian meal, which is basically just a really comical way of her saying that she wants to prove that, a vocal album can go really hard and can be a really crazy experience, something way beyond what people would expect. And I think she totally achieved that. It opens with Pleasure Is All Mine, a beautiful slow opener with a great lead vocal line and these beautiful vocal harmonies done by the Icelandic choir underneath, and a really cool beatbox groove done by Razel from The Roots. Then we continue with a short 90-second track called Show Me Forgiveness. Very beautiful song. It's just Björk singing by herself, but it has this really nice reverb that's sort of washing over it, just creates this really beautiful ambiance. And then the album takes a heavier turn with Where Is the Line? Super badass song, one of my favorites on here. And I'd say it's one of her heaviest songs probably since Army of Me, which is saying a lot. It has such a great combination of different things going on, with Björk doing the lead vocals, and then you have a great feature with Mike Patton doing these really dark, almost demonic sounding vocals underneath it. You have the Icelandic choir doing the background parts. You have Gregory Pernhagen doing what they refer to as the human trombone sound, which is really cool. And also Razel, once again, doing some great beatboxing. Really astonishing how heavy this song is without using any instruments. It kind of blows my mind. And already at song 3, I think Björk has proved her point that a vocal album does not need to be vegetarian. Then we have a beautiful ballad called Vukuro, consisting of just Björk and the Icelandic choir. This one is a good example of a song that I liked more the more I listened to it. The melody is just so beautiful, and those background harmonies just create such a perfect haunting sound. Then we have Albertan. Another one with just Björk singing. This one has a cool use of layered vocal parts on top of each other, and I feel like that's kind of a theme throughout the album. Like each song has like a different cool vocal trick about it, you know, and the way that they're utilizing all these different things at their disposal together, which is what makes this album just such an adventure. After that, we have my favorite song from this album entitled Who Is It? This song is just so beautiful and so catchy, and I love where it's placed in the album. I think it brings the energy up at a very good spot. Amazing beatboxing, too. When I watched the documentary on the making of this album and I discovered that Rozelle was actually beatboxing the drum beat to this song the whole time, I was completely blown away. Like, I didn't realize to the extent how much the voice was responsible for, like, all the sounds on this album, which is really mind-blowing. But then after that, we have Submarine, a very dark a cappella track. The vocal part on this one seems to be more deep and male-centered for the majority of it. Björk has one lead part about 3/4 of the way through, but other than that, it seems like she's singing one of the middle vocal parts throughout. Another contrast that I think adds another really nice dark touch to the album with those really deep male vocals. Then after that, we have Desired Constellation, a very pretty track, one of the few tracks on here that has some non-vocal stuff underneath it as a support with those really spacey ambient synth sounds. The production on this one almost reminds me of a song that would be on a solo Thom Yorke album, like something on Tomorrow's Modern Boxes. Very specific vibe, I really like it. And then after that, we have Oceana, super cool song, sort of has a dark vibe, but it's also groovy at the same time. Great beatboxing from Shlomo, and awesome background vocals from the London Choir. Then we have Sonnets / Unrealities X1 or 11. I was never sure if that was a number or not. Another pretty a cappella song with Björk and the Icelandic choir. And then we get to probably the most unique song on here, entitled Ancestors. I really love this song. I know it's not for everybody, but I think there's a lot of really cool stuff going on. The song has a piano part that sort of serves as the canvas for all of this vocal experimentation to happen over it, and I love all of the interesting sounds that come out of it. The throat singing especially, which is done by Tenya Tagaq. From a song like this, it's clear that Björk is one of those artists who will continue to push boundaries and experiment in any way that she sees fit, regardless of how some people might judge it. This song is the prime example on the album of showing you the depth of what the human voice is capable of, and I really love Björk's bravery and commitment to stay true to her craft no matter what. Then the mood picks up a bit with Mouth's Cradle. Cool use of throat singing in this one over a more groovy sort of vibe, and I love the placement of this song. It's a really nice way to pick up the energy for the last piece of the album. There's a good chance I'm going to pronounce this next track wrong, but I think it's called Midviku Dogs. If that's wrong, correct me in any way that you could possibly correct something like that. But this is another one, really nice use of vocal layers, just a pretty track, and it sets up the last track really nicely. The album concludes with an awesome song called Triumph of Heart. This one has a really nice danceable groove to it with 2 beatboxers, and then we have that human trombone sound coming back again, which we heard earlier in Where Is the Line. So I'm really glad that they used that sound for more than one song because it has a very unique effect. All in all, I think it's a great conclusion to the album. And like I said, I think this is one of Björk's most ambitious works, hands down. It truly showcases what is possible with the human voice between the choirs, the throat singing, the beatboxing, the human trombone, and just the experimentation with regular vocal sounds as well. So I love this album. This one gets an A. Okay, next we have Volta, and I'm going to give this one a C. Not a bad album, but I do think it's probably the weakest of the Björk discography. The thing that's always been weird about this album with me is that I actually like the majority of the songs on here, but I just think as an overall album, the mood is kind of scattered and all over the place, and there isn't a clear defined theme like we had with the previous 3 albums. One thing that's distinct to this album that I really love is the brass section. They get some amazing sounds, and I love the fact that this instrumentation is specific to this album. It makes this album a little bit cooler, I think. It opens with Earth Intruders, which is a really cool, hard-hitting electronic track that gives the opening some really nice energy. And then we have Wanderlust, which is a really beautiful track. I love the brass section, and the chorus has a really pretty melody, takes things down nicely for the second track. And then it slows down a little bit more with a ballad entitled With the Dull Flame of Desire, which features Antony. Not a bad song, but not a song that I've ever been crazy about. I think it gets a little long and starts to drag a bit, but overall it's a pretty track, and their voices I think go nicely together. Then we have Innocence, which is an amazing track. I absolutely love the production. It was co-produced with Timbaland and Danja, and just this really super cool dirty vibe and really amazing samples. Then we have like a mid-tempo song called I See Who You Are. I really love the main part that the song opens up with, and I love the vocals against that, but the pipa being used, which is a Chinese stringed instrument that they're using, it's a little too much for me. It gets distracting from the song and it kind of ruins it for me. But after that, we have Vertebrae by Vertebrae, which is actually my favorite song on this album, believe it or not. This is kind of just a weird one. It's a song I've never really heard many people go crazy over, but for some reason I've always loved it. Definitely a big part of it for me being, into music theory and stuff like that is the voicings that are happening in the brass section, which is kind of the general outline for the song. She's using, once again, those really interesting minor major 7 chords within the brass section, and I just love that groove that they build off of with just that, repetitive rhythm in the brass section, playing those really eerie chords, and she's got this interesting vocal melody on top of it. Very interesting from a theory perspective. I also love those brass swells that are happening in the background. It creates this really cool effect that sort of sounds like a ship blowing its horn. After that, we have Pneumonia, and this is a ballad that features just vocals and the brass section. And there was a lot of potential with this, but unfortunately, it's probably my least favorite song up to this point on the album. Not a terrible song, but just not one of my favorite Björk ballads. After that, we have Hope. This is a pretty cool song. There's some interesting stuff going on with the hand percussion, and then there's a cool bass line with a nice use of the kora, which is a West African stringed instrument. And then things get heavier again with Declare Independence. This song is a distorted, aggressive political piece, and a lot of people seem to agree that it's written for Greenland, trying to get them to individualize themselves from the Danish. I could be wrong about that, but that's what it seemed to be the general consensus. But it's a really cool song, and it's a very fitting track. It goes very well with the opening track, Earth Intruders, as well as Innocence. After that, the album concludes with another ballad entitled My Juvenile. Pretty song. It features Antony on vocals again, and I think their voices go nice together. Nice use of the clavichord, and just a pretty way to conclude the album. So I do appreciate the brass section. I appreciate the different stringed instruments that she's bringing in and experimenting with from Asia and Africa. I think the features are really good, and like I said, I like most of these songs individually, but I just don't think they all necessarily mix well together to form a very clear, cohesive, well-defined album. So, scoring it based on how it is as an album, I'm going to give it a C. Okay, next we have Biophilia, and I'm going to put this one in B tier. Not a bad album, but not one of her best works in my opinion. I do love the ambition and creativity behind it. It was released with an iPad app that goes along with the music, and the theme of the album is the fusion of music, technology, and nature. Björk has said that she was on a quest to use nature and technology to help us understand musical structure in a radical new way. She considers this album to be her spiritual statement, a way to redefine how we make music in the 21st century. The songs each follow a different theme within nature, and Björk had developed a chart with an outline of each song, and she paired them with a musical method that seemed most fitting for the subject matter. I won't go through each one, but here's a picture as a reference so you could see what she was working off of. Very interesting and innovative idea, and one of my favorite things about Björk, she always has this ability to consistently reinvent herself, and this album is a great example of that. I will say that the album does start off a little slow for me with the first 2 tracks, Moon and Thunderbolt. Not bad songs, but I do find them a little underwhelming, and I've listened to this album many times to see if the beginning would grow on me, and unfortunately my thoughts on it haven't really changed. Track 3 does pick things up though with Crystalline. Always loved this song, and I love the story on how it was written. According to Björk, Crystalline is using similarities between musical structures and the structure of crystals to create a song that mirrors the form of the subject. There's a mathematical basis to crystals, and she took this and related it to time signatures in music. So you have the verse being in 17/8, and then the chorus goes into 4/4, and this was all based on the structure of crystals, which is really wild. This song is definitely the highlight of the first half of the album for me. And after that, we have a really pretty ballad entitled Cosmogony. Very beautiful vocal melody, nice use of the brass section, which brings me back a little bit to Volta, and it has that punchy bass sound again that almost sounds like a heartbeat, which I love. And after that, we have probably the 2 most experimental songs on the album with Dark Matter and Hollow. Both very cool songs from an experimental perspective. Not necessarily songs I would show somebody who wants to get introduced to Björk, but they're definitely new examples of her continuing to push the envelope sound-wise, similar to what I had to say about Ancestors on Medulla. With Dark Matter, I really love the dissonant harmonies underneath the vocals. This song, I would say, creates the most intergalactic, spacey type of sound. And then Hollow has these very dissonant whole tone scale sort of harmonies in the pipe organ with these really staggered rhythmic phrases that create sort of a climbing and falling back down sort of effect to me. Definitely not my two favorite Björk songs, but from an experimental songwriting perspective, I do really respect what she's doing. After that, we have my favorite track from this album entitled Virus. I love the beautiful sounds from the gamelest, which is an instrument that we had also heard on Crystalline, and it's combined with something that sounds like a steel pan, but I think it might just be a programmed sound. It didn't look like there was steel pan used on this album when I was looking at the liner notes, but I think this song is really pretty and probably the catchiest song on the album other than maybe Crystalline. After that, we have Sacrifice, a very dark song that has one of my favorite instruments of any Björk song with the sharpsichord built by Henry Dagg. Using this instrument was such a huge undertaking because there's only one in existence and it took 5 years to make. The way it works is that it's programmed by putting pins into a steel cylinder, and apparently it takes an entire day just to program 1 minute of music, so I can only imagine what they had to go through to program it for this song and also use it in a live setting, so I have tremendous respect for them for doing that. I also love when that really heavy, distorted beat comes in towards the end with that beautiful vocal melody on top of it. Just a super solid song. Then we have the last chunk of the album where unfortunately it loses a little bit of momentum for me again with Mutual Core and Solstice. Not bad songs, but they don't really stick out to me in comparison to some of the other great stuff on here. And then the album concludes with Natura, which actually wasn't on the chart that she devised for this album, so I'm not sure the intentions of this one, but I really do like this song. It has a very unique groove in 7/8. The drum beat is kind of all over the place, and it has this sort of chaotic, scattered kind of sound, but I really like the effect that it creates, and I think it's a very cool conclusion to this very experimental album. So for me, the middle chunk of this album is really the highlight, but the beginning and the end are a little underwhelming for me, unfortunately, but like I said, I do really appreciate the ambition behind this, and it does have a handful of really solid tracks, so this one is going to get a B. Then we continue with Volnicara, and I'm actually going to give this one an S. This seems to be an album that a lot of Björk fans are divided on, but for me, I think it's her best work since Homogenic and Vespertine. This album tells you the story of Björk's breakup with Matthew Barney, and the songs are depicting where she was at before and after the breakup, which results in probably her saddest, darkest album of all time. The title is a made-up word that combines vulnerable and cure, which are two themes that will develop throughout the album. It opens up with Stone Milker, and right from the start it reminds me of something that would be from the Homogenic era, with the lush string section and the amazing beat from Arca. It's a beautiful, heart-wrenching song that depicts the feelings that you get when you're in a relationship that's failing and is on the brink of demise, and it's really setting the tone for how the album is going to develop. Then we continue with Lion Song, a very cool second track, and this one really illustrates Björk's unique sense of rhythm with her vocal lines. She has always had this ability to sing over 4/4 time with this really loose, sort of over-the-bar line kind of style, and I think that this song is a perfect example of that when you listen to the way that she's phrasing the vocal melody. Just like track 1, I love the strings and I love the beat. And in the lyrics, she's wondering if things are going to get better, but she's also reached a point where she doesn't really care either way. So again, kind of developing on that feeling of apprehension towards the relationship. After that, we go to History of Touches. More of an electronic feel on this one. There's no strings, but it's a very pretty song. And in this one, she's talking about waking up in the middle of the night next to Matthew and thinking to herself that this could be the last time that they're together. And she's reflecting on all the moments that they've had together, some good and some bad. So to me, the opening 3 tracks are her detailing her feelings leading up to the breakup. And to me, it all functions as a build-up to the 4th track entitled Black Lake. This song is so unbelievably sad. The lyrics are tear-jerking. And this seems to be the song where Björk is coming to terms with the fact that it's over for real this time. She goes on for multiple verses listing off all of the things that have faded away from their relationship, and by the last verse it seems like she's accepting the fact that it's time to move on and let go of what they had. Beautiful string arrangements, and I love that deep, pulsating bass that's happening sparsely throughout the song. It almost sounds like somebody's heartbeat. Just an incredible song. And after that we go to Family, And this is the first song where she's lyrically acknowledging that the relationship is done, and she's reflecting on the fact that their triangle of love is no more, meaning that the bond of mother, father, and child has been fragmented. And this is the halfway point of the album, so I really like how the story has been told so far, with the first half showing you the lead up to the breakup, and then the second half showing you where Björk's head is at post-breakup and what kind of things she's reflecting on. Then we have Not Get, and on this one, it seems like she's detailing the breakup and what it was like, while also talking about the healing process and how her soul has the potential to do a lot of growth through this process. I love the melody on the chorus. It sounds very intense and powerful against the string section, and then that drum groove that enters after the chorus is really cool. After that, we have Atom Dance. This is probably the most upbeat song on the album, which isn't saying much, but it seems to be describing the beginning of the healing process. It has these nice pizzicato lines in the string section against a really beautiful vocal melody in the Lydian mode, and it's also in 5/4 time too, which is a fun fact. We also have a nice return with Anthony on guest vocals. Always like hearing his collaborations with Björk. And then after that, we have Mouth Mantra, an amazing track, great string arrangements, great production, and apparently this song is about a 3-week period where she couldn't speak after getting surgery on vocal cord nodes. I'm not entirely sure about this, but it seems like she's drawing a parallel between that experience of not being able to speak with the fact that she felt like her needs weren't being heard towards the end of the relationship. Like I said, that could be wrong, but that's kind of my instinct when I read the lyrics. Really nice track and a good setup for the final track, which is Quicksand. This one opens up with an electronic drum beat, and as the vocals develop more, we have these beautiful string voicings that enter behind it. Amazing lyrics. This song was apparently written after her mother suffered a heart attack and was in a coma for a week, and I think, once again, she's drawing a parallel to the feeling that she's going through now, where she feels like she's sinking like quicksand. But at the same time, there is some light at the end of the tunnel lyrically, and you do get the sense that Björk is picking up the pieces and moving on at the same time, with lyrics like, "When I'm broken, I am whole," and "When I'm whole, I am broken." Great closing track, although I always did think it ended a little abruptly, but that's really the only critique I have of this album. I think it's a beautiful piece of work. It has a very coherent message and story that develops throughout, and I think that if you're a fan of Homogenic and Vespertine, this is probably the next closest album to capturing the sound of that era of Björk. So a very good, emotional, powerful album. This one gets an S. Okay, so last but not least, we have Utopia, and I'm actually going to give this one an A. That might be surprising to some, but I do think that this album is a lot better than some people give it credit for. Similar to Medulla, I think it gets better the more you listen to it. It definitely took a couple listens to really grow on me, but there's a lot of stuff I love about this. I love the production, I love the addition of a flute section, and I just think the majority of the songs on here are very good. Track 1 is Arisen My Senses. Very solid first track, amazing production from Arca, beautiful harp lines following that really powerful vocal melody. And Björk is establishing a completely different tone at the start of this album. She has said that this album was about rediscovering love in a spiritual way, which is obviously a stark contrast from Volnicara. Then we have a beautiful ballad called Blissing Me, which seems to be commenting on what it's like forming relationships in this digital age that we're in. Amazing production, once again. I love the synth sounds, I love the harps. And after that, we have my favorite track from the album entitled The Gate. Super intense song. It opens with this really spacey vocal part with bird sounds in the background, and then it continues to have these really ambient animal noises throughout the verse. Then the chorus comes in, and this is another one of those songs where I think the chorus just hits so hard and it's so epic when it comes in. And then you have these really deep, dark bass notes underneath it with these really mysterious arpeggios going on in the synth. Just such an incredible song. Then after that, we have the title track, Utopia. This song is pretty cool. I like the fact that it's predominantly just flute and vocals, but I did think it was a little bit underwhelming of a song, especially considering the fact that it's the title track, but still not a bad song. After that, we have the 10-minute long Body Memory, and Björk has said that this song was written intended to be the complete opposite of Black Lake. While Black Lake is all focused on the darkness she was going through, this song is looking at the second half of her life and where she can go from here. Then we have Features Creatures, a really mysterious, spacey vocal track with some flutes. Minus the flute section, I always thought this sounded like a track that could have been on Medulla as well, so it's cool to kind of see hints of previous albums in some of these songs. The next 3 tracks, in my opinion, are the strongest part of the album, with 3 incredible songs: Courtship, Loss, and Sue Me. Courtship has my favorite flute parts of any of these songs. I love how they work so well with the heavy bass parts, really interesting contrast. Loss is an incredible ballad that gives us sounds that bring us back to the Vespertine era, and Björk has said that this song was meant to be a continuation of pagan poetry. And Sue Me is just so hard-hitting and badass. I love how loose the time feels over the verse, and then that chorus comes in and that bass drum hits so hard, just such an epic transition. Incredible production on this song as well, and in general, I think the production throughout the album is just very good. After that, we have Tabula Rasa, another ballad with vocals and flutes. Not a bad song, but not one of my favorites on here, but I do think it is a good slower song to put in this place to take a little bit of a breather before the last stint of the album. After that, we have Claim Staker, cool use of different sequences and delays in the synth parts, and really nice vocal parts. And after that, we have Paradisia, which is the instrumental flute feature track. I always thought this song was really beautiful, great flute writing on Björk's part, and just very catchy melodies. Then we have our second to last song, Saint. I always loved this one, very beautiful vocal melody, and I love how repetitive it is. It sort of reminds me of a slower Sigur Rós song where they keep repeating and developing the vocal melody over and over. Another song that almost reminds me of something from the Homogenic or Vespertine era. The album concludes with Future Forever, which is an amazing song and basically serves as a conclusion to the Volnicara chapter. She's speaking on how her past can be a loop in her mind and how she's working to turn it off and move on to a new future. And I think that this album was a great exploration of all the different things that she had been experiencing since her breakup and her adjustment to this new reality. So all in all, I think it's a very good album. And while there are a few songs on here that I'm not crazy about, I do think that the majority of them are great. And like I said, it has a couple that even give me hints of Homogenic, Vespertine, and Medulla. It also leaves me with a sense of wonder as to what Björk's next album is going to be like, especially if she's entering this new phase of her life after going through the natural grieving process of a relationship that ended. So yeah, this one's going to get an A. So that's it. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully you learned a few things. And like I said, if I got any information wrong, please correct me in the comments and I'll fix it. We covered a lot of stuff, so something might have slipped here and there, but hopefully not. And feel free to let me know your thoughts in the comments, where we agree and disagree, and I'd love to see where you guys would rank these albums as well. And if you enjoyed this and you'd like to check out my other tier list videos, feel free to check out the link in the description, and I'll leave one in the comments as well. And that's about it. Thanks again for watching, I really appreciate it, and I will see you guys at the next video. Take care.